Oh, where do I begin? So, I'm actually been in the fields of user experience and information architecture for 20 years now. So when I started, it was 2001, back in the day. So, um, listening to the shows up to this point, I thought, I've had so many failures in my career, but I don't really contextualize them as that. I don't think about them in that way per se, but it's because of all the experiences I've had. And so I thought, instead of getting into one specific story, I thought I'd do a little creative storytelling with respect to my experiences throughout my career. So when I was asked to come on the show, first of all, I'm very excited to be here. So thank you very much, Jans and Jens, for the opportunity to share, and Fatima and Sabina for sharing your stories. It's great to hear other people making mistakes, and I hope I guarantee I'm probably gonna be the champion by the time you get this done, because the reason why I want to talk about failures in context is because we don't remember isolated facts neurologically. We remember them in context. So the point about being scared, Jan, you were saying about how, thank you for having the courage to share some of your failures. Well, at 48, I don't really look at it as courageous. I look at it as, well, sure, what do you want to know? Because at the end of the day, I'm not really afraid of sharing things anymore. In fact, I see it more as a responsibility. I should be sharing my failures to provide other people the courage, especially the younger generation, the opportunity to get better and to do better, because I want them to do better and be better than I was, and the opportunities I had. And maybe in areas where I failed, you might be able to learn from that. So I started out this whole process by sitting down with my wife, who's also my business partner for 10 years, to start helping me think about ideas about specific areas where I failed. And frankly, at one point, I actually had to ask her to stop sharing. It was kind of hurting my ego a little bit. But we have a great relationship. She's brilliant. She's beautiful. But then it got me thinking, because we wrote out all these things on the back of the chalkboard, and there were like 67 of them. So I started thinking about, well, how do you define failure? Is it simply making a mistake that created a domino effect that created a series of perpetual, what I call face plants, in other words, epic failures? Is it as straightforward as not delivering for a client? Or is it one of those moments when I thought, come on, Jeff, you had one job. Like, you had one job and you didn't even get that done. And the answer, in my experience, to all the above is it's all of them. Failing is all of them, but it's how you put those things into perspective, how you contextualize those failures while you're going through the process, as Fatma and Sabina just described, and your other guests, as well as how you learn from them over time. So what I'm going to do quickly, because I only have about 10 minutes, is I want to share 5 stories of failure. One, what I'm calling Captain Obvious moment that I learned about 5 years into my career that maybe changed everything in terms of the way I went about doing it. 2 psychological theories that I think would help everyone contextualize things regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur or working in a big business. 1 really bad short poem that I passed along to Werner Pukart, who was laughing his head off about it. So if it fails, it's on him. And 5 takeaways from everyone that I think they would find value in. So my failures, what was I thinking at the time? So I was a pioneer in podcasting in 2006. I was the first to get into podcasting in the design world and user experience and information architecture, but I failed to market myself entirely. I didn't make any of the shows about me. I made them about the thought leaders. I made them about the industries themselves. Now, that made sense at the time, but I also look back on it now and realize that I had an opportunity to gain profit in that medium. I published 5 conferences. And when I look back about what I was charging, that was about $80,000 for the 3 months it took to code, design, and develop. Now, you have to understand, contextually, this is 1 year after, 1 year before the first iPhone ever came out. So if you can try to put that into memory. And although I may have left all this money on the table, at the time, it never dawned on me to do that, because ultimately I was trying to get ideas out there for other people to share. But from a business perspective, I could have absolutely asked for that, because I wasn't asking to do this. People were asking me to come and help share their ideas. And I marketed the ideas of everyone else, who then in turn went out and made a ton of money off of my work for absolutely free. While interviewing thought leaders, I had 3 different book companies offer me to write a book, and I turned them all down. Now, why would I do that? Well, at the time, again, this is 1 year after. We're now in 2008. Why would I turn down those people? Well, because I'm completely overwhelmed. There's this new thing called the iPhone. I'm interviewing all of the thought leaders from around the world that are building these disciplines, that are having these experiences, including sharing where they failed. And at the time I was thinking, well, what in the world would I have to share? Well, looking back on it, I should have written that book. I could have talked about that panoramic view that I was experiencing that could have helped other people avoid mistakes and failures going forward. Again, another opportunity lost to position myself. I recently gave a closing keynote at a major university and went 45 minutes over the allotted time while a convention was waiting to come in to use the main stage. Now, why did I do that? I've given opening and closing keynotes around the world over the last 15 years. Well, what I didn't factor in was the audience participation. At one point, I had 2 people on the stage, 10 people on the stage, and at the end, I had the entire audience on the stage while I was sitting in the audience to prove a point around how loud social media can be and how we can't process all that information. So I don't think they're going to be inviting me back to give a talk anytime soon as a result. I even set up an international conference with a young design firm I was mentoring for 2 years, but I didn't create a contract with them. I just trusted them that they'd follow through. Well, they didn't. Now, they didn't, and I lost $100,000 as a result of it. But again, the failure was mine. It wasn't theirs. I didn't create a contract. I didn't look at international business laws, nor did I look at tax implications working out of Canada during a recession. Because the government of Canada during a recession said if you make more money than X number of dollars outside of Canada to try to keep business within this country, we're going to tax you at 75%. In other words, even if I'd gotten the contract and made that money, I didn't look into the tax implications after the fact. So I would have failed at that as well. Christina Mouser and I, my business partner and wife, created workshops that we ran around the world on user experience, information architecture, enterprise content strategy, and what is now called UX writing. And in 2009, I did a whole bunch of research. Why do people hate workshops? Why are they not engaging with them? Well, I found out the food is horrible. The guy's pitching you on a business process for 8 hours using a dry PowerPoint presentation. It's in a horrible environment. Nobody's engaging. They're not fun. They're not interactive. So I flipped it all on its head. I'm like, great, I'm going to create fun, interactive, engaging workshops. I'm going to go out and find the sponsors I created, worked from or learned from over the years, gave away books, online tools. I created what are now known as design sprints. So everyone working off of everyone's work, presenting their ideas, sharing, iterating. In Montreal, I actually brought in 4 colleagues to take on the role of senior people and asked them to pose questions from that perspective and have them iterate accordingly. And I only made about 2 or 3 contracts in 5 years off of those workshops, and I drew even. Where did I fuck up? I gave everything away. Why are you going to hire me if I'm literally giving you everything? If I'm empowering you and you're having a great experience and you feel confident enough to do all this work on your own, why in the world would you ever bring me or Christina into your company to help lead you through that? Where they were failing, they were succeeding in leading workshops, the companies before me. Where I succeeded, they were where I had failed in bringing more contracts, they were succeeding. So while trying to create a better experience, I actually took money off the table from the business. And then there was one Captain Obvious moment that I had in my career. And if you don't know Captain Obvious, this is a fictional character for Hotels.com in marketing. And the ads are really simple. You can go on YouTube and just search for Captain Obvious. Basically what happens is people in this 30-second ad will talk about some obvious bad experience they're having while traveling, and this guy shows up and points out the obvious, and they look at him and go, yeah, thanks, Captain Obvious, right? So my Captain Obvious moment in my career, so it's meant to be satirical, it's meant to be funny, was the fact that I majored in behavioral and cognitive psychology. In other words, I understood from the time I was basically 21 and working with people with acquired brain injuries, working with neurologists and speech language pathologists in the first 5 years of my career, I understood how people behaved, how they act and react to other people and how they change. Yet I went into the fields of IA and UX believing people would want to know where they were failing so that they could mitigate risk. Now, why did I believe that? Well, my father was an executive for a Fortune 500 company when I grew up. I grew up with Stephen Covey and Charles Crone, the thought leaders that guided the Fortune 500 companies. And mitigating risk was all I ever heard about. I'm like, great, well, if I can outline failures to people, they're going to want to know where they're failing so they can succeed. But I didn't consider how I was presenting those failures in the first 5 years of my career to the individuals that I was talking to. How do I present an idea to a CEO, a product manager? Who are these people? What are their roles? How do they see the worlds around them? So over time, over the next 5 years, I started to do a deep dive into everybody's role. I started to understand everyone's job, all the different processes, agile, design thinking, lean. I did a hard dive into everything. So no matter who I was talking to, I could pivot and create metaphors around an understanding of what might have been incredibly complex into something that they could understand from their perspective, not that of a user experience professional or information architect. And there were two psychological theories looking back that I realized, drawing on that ultimately are still true today, that I think we really need to be aware of, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a leader in a company. The first is something called earned dogmatism. This is a study out of Loyola University in Chicago, and it states that if society or anyone else calls someone an expert, or a group of experts deems someone else to be an expert, that individual actually loses their sense of curiosity and wonderment. They stop thinking about whether or not their expertise is actually not valid anymore. They create biases in terms of the way they ask questions, the way they frame things, and they become locked into the way they want to think about things. And pivoting off of that is the reinforcement of what is known as pluralistic ignorance. So when groups of people are uncertain during times of change, they tend to look to the actions of others as correct. So even if the individual who's developed this sense of expertise or earned dogmatism, even if they don't have the experiences, even if they don't know, we're going to look to those people because they work at Google, because they work at Yahoo, because they work for a company that we respect and we know. But as an entrepreneur, you aren't Google. You aren't Yahoo. You don't have that kind of money. You don't have that experience. You don't have those resources. You likely don't have that long-term vision and lots of room for yourself to fail and fall down. So this is why strong leadership, whether you're an entrepreneur or working at a company, is so important. Because if not, we create a kind of groupthink within the senior levels of the organization that ultimately leads to poor outcomes or biased outcomes, especially when we're looking at things respectfully, Fatma, like data, right? Data can tell you what, where, when, and how people are succeeding or failing. But unless you do qualitative research, in my experience over the last 20 years, you can't understand why people are failing. Data will never answer why. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of feedback about why that's wrong. And I'm happy to take those questions at a future date. But to sidestep earned dogmatism, when you're looking for answers from other thought leaders, seek inspiration, not absolutes, right? There's nothing wrong with going to conferences to look to people who have been very successful, who work for big companies, but seek inspiration for them. And then to avoid pluralistic ignorance, in other words, not following that thought leader to the end of time, when you return, bring everybody with a diverse group of people and professions and opinions. Put all of the ideas on the table and make sure that you look at the outcomes objectively. And so if all of those psychological terms have just bored the hell out of you, I came up with a really bad poem, and I'm not a poet, so laugh along with me. Roses are red, violets are blue. I fucked up throughout my career, and if you're successful, so will you. There's nothing wrong with fucking up. In fact, a long time ago, I learned through podcasting that if you really want to know who the true thought leaders are, in other words, the people that really know their stuff, through all the interviews I've done, I learned to ask people about their failures. And the people who had a ton of wisdom and a lot of experience, or even a little bit of experience, in that particular frame, were happy to share those failures. They found joy in them. They were able to look back because we remember things in context and laugh at their perspective at that point in time. So it's with great gratitude and humility that I thank all of these companies, organizations, the people that have allowed me the space and place to fail, including Werner Pukert, who was actually someone that reached out to me from South Africa when I was mentoring him way back in the day when he heard me on a podcast, who's now in Warsaw, Poland. Dixon Lowe, who was from Korea originally, who was doing University of Tokyo, Japan. One of the most brilliant young minds I have ever had the privilege of talking to. I don't know why he was looking to me for mentorship. Frankly, I was just blown away by everything he was doing. He's now working as a senior designer at LinkedIn. It's because of all these people, because I took the chances and because I failed over and over and over again, but always got back up, that I had these opportunities. So putting failure into context, I'd recommend a few things for you to take away from this in my own experience. To get to better ideas faster, simply admit when you don't know. I don't know are the three most important words you can learn when you're in a business, or especially as an entrepreneur, even if that's your title. even if that's what people are looking to you to do, because then that'll open the door for other people to give you recommendations on what to do. Haters are always going to hate. They're also usually not the ones innovating. They're also the ones that are sitting on the sideline a year from now continuing to do nothing while you continue to try and do different things. As my grandfather once told me, he was a humble farmer who had no money, but one of the sweetest men I ever met in my life. Don't worry about all the little things along the way in the life, because you don't want to wake up 80 wondering what the hell you were worried about. The way you live without regret, as my grandfather pointed out, is to try, fail, and carry on. And remember, you're not failing as long as you're learning and gaining wisdom, so you're not making the same mistakes over and over again. And most importantly, follow your joy. There's a difference between happiness and joy. I think Matthew McConaughey actually said this, so I feel kind of cheesy repeating it. But the actor, where it's this idea where ultimately, you know, his concept is, all right. But he wants to follow his happiness is this idea that comes along once in a while. You know, you work towards something, towards the end of something, you achieve your goal, you're happy. But joy is something that wakes you up every day. I didn't get into podcasting for money. I got into podcasting because I have a stack full of handwritten letters about this high from about 100 people around the world that have thanked me for inspiring them. I didn't get into mentoring because I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to educate and help other people succeed. I want people to do better than me. We have a lot of important problems that need being solved in the world today, and it shouldn't be about any one individual. It needs to be about all of us. So with that, thank you very much. If you want to reach out and chat sometime, that's how you can get a hold of me. And if you want to go to a TLDR, Too Long Did Not Read blog that I created a year ago, you can check out the blog. That's it.